Hello, and welcome to Heilman Haver, the Stage and Screen Podcast, episode 18, coming to you virtually from Casa de Quinn and 1111 Studios in beautiful Port Orchard, Washington. I'm Craig Heilman.
And I'm Matt Haver. We're two local actors looking to hone our craft by exploring the best in local theater and on the big screen. Each week we bring you entertainment news and views, celebrate classic Hollywood, enjoy cocktails with that Tinseltown twist, interview talented local actors and directors, and chat with industry experts and artists from LA to the UK.
We're excited to be joined in a few moments by Tim Conway Jr., award-winning talk show host at KFI in Los Angeles and, as you may have guessed, son of actor and comedian Tim Conway. But first, we wanted to let you know about a special event coming up at the Historic Roxy Theater in Bremerton, Washington. The Roxy is turning 80 this year, and to kick off the celebration, the Roxy is throwing a birthday party for Quincy Jones, who turns 88 on Sunday, March 14th. The Roxy will be hosting several special events, including showings of The Wiz on March 12th, 13th, and 14th. Come down Sunday afternoon, early evening to the Roxy's pop-up wine bar and wear your favorite Wiz or Wizard of Oz costume. We'll see you there, and stay tuned to Heilman and Haver for more details, and visit the Roxy Facebook page for updates at Roxy Bremerton.
And speaking of the Roxy, now playing on the Roxy big screen is the much-awaited Supernova, the powerful and touching story about a gay couple, one a musician and the other a novelist, played by Stanley Tucci and Colin Firth, as they embark on a road trip as dementia starts to take hold of one of them. Also continuing its run is the eye-opening documentary MLK FBI, based on newly declassified files. This film by Sam Pollard explores the history of the U.S. government's surveillance and harassment of Martin Luther King Jr. And speaking of history, our guest today is a man whose fans love him for his knowledge of history and his down-to-earth take on life, and the refreshing levity he delivers each weekday from 6 to 10 p.m. on his award-winning radio show on KFI-AM 640 in Los Angeles.
Tim Conway Jr. was born and raised in the City of Angels and proudly admits he survived 10 years in what he can only describe as a youth detention center, the Los Angeles Unified School District. He spent his childhood around Santa Anita, Hollywood Park, and Del Mar Racetracks with his father, Tim Conway of Carol Burnett Show fame, his 4 younger brothers, and 1 older sister. During his early career, he produced his own internal internet radio show, and thanks to his popularity, he was offered an opportunity to host a radio talk show on 97.1 KLSX-FM. Over 12 successful years, Conway's show became famous for providing Southern Californians with a wide variety of entertaining topics, including live police chases, Hollywood craziness, and sharing current events with a twist of humor.
And in 2009, when KLSX switched to an all-music format, Conway joined forces with KFI-AM 640, the #1 news talk station in the country, to continue bringing his unique and comedic perspectives to topics like politics, gambling, and more. Throughout his career, Conway's been featured on numerous television programs and has received various industry awards, including a Golden Mike Award, an Edward R. Murrow Award, and a Marconi nomination for Personality of the Year in 2016. And when he's not busy entertaining listeners, he enjoys spending time with his family, supporting local charitable organizations, and hanging out at the racetracks. Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Welcome to the show.
You got it. Listen, my pleasure, guys.
Growing up in LA with a well-known actor and comedian father, did you always know that you wanted to be an entertainer, or was there a specific moment that sparked your interest in show business?
Well, we didn't actually, there's a policy in my house that's not really well known. We didn't actually get to meet our dad until we turned 35. So I just saw him on TV a lot and enjoyed his work. Very talented man. No, I don't know. I think it just sort of, when I think you get into radio or into show business when you really can't do anything else. You try other things in life and you realize you can't get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and sit in a cubicle. You realize you can't work outside. You realize you're not good at sports. You realize, a lot of things. Then you just sort of slide into, I guess I could do this, right? And that's sort of how it happened. It was just like really dumb luck. And anytime you get, any job in radio, especially, in a big city, there's a lot of luck involved, a tremendous amount of luck involved. So these blowhards that tell you, oh, well, I was in Memphis and then I went to Akron. I worked my ass off, called people all day. They're full of shit. They're lying. It's luck.
I just finished a book about Orson Welles and was listening to some interviews with him, and there's a guy with a career, and he gave all the credit to luck. Yes. I was lucky to have these people in my life. I was lucky to get this break. I was lucky.
Right.
So
yeah. No, yeah, and then people get up at the award show and they thank their team, and they got a great team around them and everything. They're just, and then they go into politics and crap like that. It's they should get up there and go, look, I'm a lucky SOB. Thank you. Good night.
Right.
Yeah. I'll tell you, even in business, guy I worked, I tell the story all the time. It's not show business, just work. But a guy I worked with 20 years ago, I ended up calling about getting a job, 10 years ago, which led to a bunch of other stuff. And it's just weird how things, as you go through life, turn out that are just luck of the draw. One door opens, you don't know where that's going to lead. And next thing you know.
Yeah, and it's another reason why you don't burn bridges, because eventually you got to maybe call somebody and go, hey, I'm busted out. You got anything for me?
Yeah. So your dad, like a bunch of folks did back in the day, radio onto television. You've kind of done it the opposite way. You've been in radio for 25 years, but you started in television and film as an actor and producer. Did you, which is kind of, counterintuitive in the industry a bit. Did you always have an interest in radio, or is it something you fell into as time went on?
No, I always wanted to do radio, and then I just got into producing TV because a buddy of mine called and said, we're producing a show up in Canada. Can you go up to Canada to figure out what's wrong with the show? It's called Boogie's Diner. And I went up there and I said, yeah, I'll tell you what's wrong with the show. Everybody on the show has to be fired, except the actors. Everybody's got to go. And he says, well, short of that, what can I do? I said, well, you got to bring in writers. So I brought in new writers, and we got picked up for another season, which they were happy about. But here's when I knew show business wasn't for me. I was working on a show called High Tide, and there was an actor, I can't remember his name, but he was supposed to be walking down the beach, and he runs into an old high school, a guy he knew in high school, but they were enemies. They hated each other in high school. So the scene starts, and he walks by, and goes, hey, Dave, how you doing? And I'm like, no. You don't understand. You guys hated each other in high school. It's an uncomfortable situation here. It's not best buddies. And so he does it again, and he's like, and he walks in, and he goes, I never liked you much. I go, no. You don't start the fight again. It's just an uncomfortable moment, and then you move on. And so I had my resume with me, right? And I said to him, I said, this is my resume, and there's about 14 or 15 TV shows that I did. I said, do you recognize any of the shows I've done? And he looked at the resume and he said, I don't recognize any of them. And I said, you know why? And he says, no. I said, because they're all shit. Everything I've ever worked on is crappy. Everything I worked on is the worst, right? And I know crap, and what you're doing is perfect. Crap is what you're doing.
One more for the resume.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I knew I couldn't do that. I just wasn't that into it. And it takes a lot of work. Those guys are working 18, 19 hours a day. And I am inherently super duper lazy. Like I just, like 2 minutes, you guys asked me to do this podcast, I think in June of last year.
Oh, well, it was a month or two ago.
Month or two, okay.
It seemed like June, but yeah.
Okay.
It's all a blur.
And then literally, and nothing against you two young men, literally 5 minutes before we went on, I'm like, oh, I should probably listen to one of those podcasts. It's just not you guys. It's just total laziness.
Well, it can't be all laziness because you've made some moves within radio. You've won some awards, and you're talking about not having to get up too early. You slipped into a time slot. When my old radio colleague at KVI up here in Seattle, Brian Suits, moved from LA back up to Seattle.
That's right.
And I was in, let's see, you made the move originally from KLSX to KFI in 2009. You've been there ever since.
Right.
And then slid into that afternoon time slot. And my question is that just to avoid the traffic in LA? Or it's got KFI's got a long and distinguished history in LA, number one news talk in the country. What is it that you enjoy most about your show there at KFI? Is it the abundance of news events in town, the audience, the traffic?
The paycheck is very good.
Paycheck.
But Brian Suits is great. Brian Suits is one of the smartest guys in radio, and my dad really enjoyed the Brian Suits show. And but no, I can't stand traffic, so I really probably shouldn't even be living in LA. And I try to do everything I can to avoid it. So I literally, whenever I get a job, I try to move within a mile of where I'm going to be working. So when I worked in Koreatown, I literally lived in Koreatown on Normandy and Wilshire. For people not familiar with it, it's a really busy, congested area. And I was living in like the 12th story of an apartment building in Koreatown, which I really enjoyed. But then I lost that job and I moved to KFI, and literally I bought a house in Burbank that's a mile from the station because I just can't stand sitting in traffic. I effing hate it. I hate it. But what's nice about KFI, look, I've been doing the same crap on radio for 25 years. And when I was with KLSX, maybe once every 2 years, when you're in a Target or something, the guy goes, hey, he goes, I recognize your voice, right? Maybe 3 times in the 12 years I was there. But now with KFI, almost on a daily basis, some guy will hear me at, like a restaurant or whatever and say, hey, are you on KFI? So it's not my act. It's how powerful that station is. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I grew up listening to that station. I mean, I was a huge fan of the John and Ken show, which is on right before us. And I used to send them audition tapes to try to get interviews. And John told me that he used to take the tape and give it to his kids so they can record music over it. Kind of cool.
Well, I can identify with that. I got into radio in college and ended up working with a lot of the guys that I grew up listening to. And Suits was our evening host. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And he talked about KFI a lot. And so KFI was just that was like the pantheon. So right. It's neat to get some background.
Yeah, he's terrific. And as I said, my dad was a huge fan. And I told you guys this story before, but for the show, I called my dad and I said, hey, I got a job at KFI. And he says, who are you replacing? I said, Brian Suits. He goes, wow, Brian Suits. Where's he going? He's going up to Seattle. He goes, what station is it going to be on? I said, I don't know. I'll find out. He said, well, can I podcast it? I said, I'll find out. He goes, what about streaming? Can I hear it live? I said, Dad, remember this conversation started with, I got a job. It's turned into the, Brian Suits show. I would say that most of the things that I talk about on KFI, I would say about 85 to 90% of them, I either got from the racetrack or I heard at the racetrack at the horse. Because those guys, everybody that goes to the racetrack is a character. Everybody. And the old timers have a saying at the racetrack where if there's 2 horses that have separated themselves from the pack, and it's the 8 and 7, 7-8, 8-7. With every stride, there's a new leader. 7-8, 8-7, 8-7, 7-8. And the old timers in the track will yell out, "We got ourselves a ding dong!" Right? And so I was talking about a story one night about this woman in San Diego that killed her husband. I'm like, oh, what an a-hole she is. And I found out he was cheating with her sister. I'm like, oh, well, he's the a-hole. And the only reason he did it is because she spent all of his money. Okay, she's an a-hole. I couldn't figure this out. I couldn't figure out who the bigger a-hole was. So I said, oh, man, that's a ding-dong we got here, right? And I would have never said it twice, but Matt Money Smith, who's on our 570 AM, the sports station at our iHeartMedia, he calls me up after the show and he goes, dude, I've been listening to radio for 40 years. I've never had to pull off the freeway because I thought I was going to crash. I was laughing so hard. He goes, you've got to use that term ding dong is unbelievable. And again, if it wasn't for him, I'd never said it twice. Never.
We talk about the track. I swear one of the funniest movies I saw your dad in was The Long Shot.
Oh, yeah.
And the image of him running out into the track with the red thing, was just was hilarious.
Yeah, he loved the racetrack. I remember being at Santa Anita with him, and I was coming out of the bathroom, and I saw this guy who was throwing up. His pants were down around his ankles, and he was leaning into a toilet at the racetrack, and he was screaming to his friend, "Hey, go bet this horse! Go bet it!" Right? He's throwing up. And so I go back to the table. And I tell my dad that story. I go, man, the guy's got his pants around his ankles. He's on his knees, throwing up in the toilet and yelling at his buddy to go bet a horse. And my dad, without skipping a beat, goes, who do you like? I'm like, Dad, he's throwing up at the racetrack. I think he's out of luck. I think his luck has run out.
And by the way, that was Charles Bukowski.
Right.
So, well, LA, you work in LA. It's one of the most diverse cities in the world, epicenter for all things entertainment. How has growing up in LA and the son of a television and film celebrity shaped your show or how you do radio?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, which is like the ugly stepchild of Los Angeles. And it's a lot different than what it was. And I'm not just saying this, because older people, complain about the good old days. It really has become a really filthy, dangerous place to be. It really is. And so you got to constantly look out for idiots. I don't know if you saw this in the news, but there was a guy wearing a watch in Beverly Hills, $500,000 watch in Beverly Hills, and 3 guys at 2:00 in the afternoon, broad daylight, stick a gun in his head, to his head, and then take his watch. Well, that's like literally, that happens probably 10 to 15 times a day around LA. They're getting rid of the budget for the cops. They took $150 million out, and then they wonder, and then they're releasing guys early from prison because of COVID, and then they're like, shit, I wonder what happened here. I wonder why crime's going up. Odd, strange. No one can figure it out.
It's this logic you keep talking about.
Right.
Well, your fans love you for your often comedic perspectives on stuff just like that. Heavy topics that you can find a way to spin, in a humorous light. How do you approach topic selection for your show? Do you look for the humorous stuff first and kind of present the news angle, or is it the other way around? Find the news and then tap into the old Conway funny bone for the funny detail.
Well, Sharon Bellio and Mondo and Angel Martinez, and they're the ones that do all the work. I literally, you do a little research online, you try to figure out what's going on just so you don't embarrass yourself, and then you go in. Look, I used to do a show over another radio station on KLSX with a guy named Doug Steckler, and we used to do 6.5 hours of prep each day. We'd get to the station at 11:30. And we'd go on at 6 p.m., right? So we literally would work for 3 hours, take a half hour to get a meal, and then work for 3 more hours. 6.5 hours of prep, writing everything. Everything was written, almost every beat of the show. And then we said one day, all right, let's take 6 months off where we come in a minute before the show without talking to each other and see what goes on with the ratings. They were exactly the same as when we spent 6.5 hours prepping. Exactly the same. So we said, F that.
Good old Arbitron.
Yeah, right.
Anybody out there testing? Anybody listening?
I think when we interview people, I think it's, I'm just naturally curious about stuff anyway. And I'm excited that, when people say yes to be on the show, I think it's kind of cool, because I know that when I was younger, I used to love calling talk radio. I was punished a lot when I was a kid. I used to love calling talk radio. And the rule was that you had to be 18. If you call KBC, they'll hang up on you going, all right, call us back when you're 18. And I'm like, well, that sucks, right? I mean, you just discriminate against kids like that. I mean, that's, they're not drinking or smoking. They just want to talk on the radio. So we don't do that. We like the kids, call up, and kids are always, the funniest and the most natural on the air anyway. There should be kids talk radio is what there should be.
Oh, there's an idea. If this podcast thing doesn't work out, we should look into that, Greg.
Yeah, there you go. But you mentioned, Tim, you mentioned being naturally curious. I know that's one thing Matt and I have in common too, is we love getting people on here, just asking questions and finding out stuff. The one thing I look at in the advent of all this technology is a lot of kids these days, everything's on the phone. There's an instant gratification, instant knowledge. Do you think we're losing some of that curiosity in some of our younger folks, and where the next interviewer is going to come from with this?
Well, I think you're onto something. I mean, I don't like to do it I hate to do this, but anytime I can't come up with a name, like I'm thinking of the lead singer of The Who, right? And I can't come up with it. I instantly go online and try to figure it out, and it does slow you down a little because you don't have to think anymore. Everything is right at your fingertips. But I will say this though, I have a daughter who's 15, and if it wasn't for Zoom and texting and her cell phone, this pandemic and her being home for a year would have been a disaster.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I mean, those little phones, as much as people complain about them, they've saved a lot of friendships, because otherwise, I mean, can you imagine if this pandemic hit when you were younger, and maybe I'm a better example. When I was younger, we just had phones. We didn't have, any way other way to communicate. And we didn't even have answering machines. When you called somebody, they had to be home ready to talk to them. That's crazy.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, right.
So you mentioned the technology thing, and you do podcasting and your YouTube and social media, just like Matt and I do. And with all the advent of all this media, and maybe this started with satellite radio, however 20 some odd years back when.
Right.
What do you think the future is for terrestrial radio? Do you think it's still relevant, is as relevant as it used to be, and can stay relevant in the future, or are we just going to kind of migrate into these new mediums?
Well, they always say radio's dying, and then last year we had the best year that KFI has had in 20 years.
Wow.
I mean, obviously it had something to do with the pandemic and people want information. I get that. And if I had to do it all over again, I wish there was no pandemic. I'd love to trade in the ratings and get this, country back to normal. But I think that'll always be around because, there are certain things that you need to like watch or listen to live. And sports is one of them. Like, are you guys sports fans?
Yeah.
Okay. And when you're watching the what is that? The Stanley Cup?
Yeah.
What team?
That's the Bruins.
Oh, the Bruins. Okay. You can't watch a Bruins game, like when you DVR it and you're like 15, 20 minutes behind, because one of your a-hole buddies will text you the score.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And ruin it for you. So you got to watch sports live. That's one thing. You also have to watch police chases live. And when you're stuck in traffic and, you see a bunch of helicopters around, police helicopters, and there's some action, you want information immediately. And so you turn on, KFI, and we usually, try to provide it for you. I think it's, I look, with podcasting, it's taken some of the audience away, and with, with streaming and stuff like that. But I still think that, terrestrial radio, as long as they keep putting them in cars, will be fine. But the new Tesla, they don't include AM radio. So, I mean, my agent, a guy named Eric Weiss, bought a brand new Tesla, and he's on his way home, went to turn on the station to hear one of his clients, and he couldn't do it because they didn't have an AM radio. So, hope that trend doesn't continue.
Going the way of the 8-track.
Well,
that's right.
AM radio always throws me back to my grandfather's old car when you to do a preset, you had to pull the button out, tune it, and then push the button back in.
Right, and then you remember I had to turn the dial to try to tune the station in. Yeah, it was kind of weird. But I hope it sticks around for a long time. I love it. I love talk radio growing up, and we really do have like a younger audience. Look, we have a significant part of our audience that's in their 20s, like 25 to 30 years old. And when I was 25 to 30, I was like the only guy listening to talk radio. All my other friends were out there, trying to get chicks and drinking and smoking weed. And I was listening to talk radio like an idiot.
Well, there's some basic things, and you look at ebooks and things like that, but there's nothing better than holding a physical book.
Mm-hmm.
Newspapers, there's
Right.
nothing to me better than actually reading a newspaper. Maybe
Right.
a mold,
Right.
But to me, it's the same with radio. There's podcasts and things, you're walking around with your, the iPod or your phone or whatever it is.
Right.
But there's nothing like hearing a conversation between some people, and there's something about it to me that's timeless.
Right, and it keeps you company too. I mean, I drove from my wife's from Oregon, and so I drove from Portland back to Burbank, and it was a Saturday and Sunday. It took 2 days to do it, and I listened to sports radio the entire way, and it sort of like was having a buddy in the car who also enjoyed sports, and I even called in. I like never even called talk radio anymore. And I called in like to ask a question, and then I got nervous going on the air with this guy, like an idiot.
Role reversal.
Yeah, exactly right. But it does keep people company, and if you're alone in the car, I can say something like, "Hey, John Elway's coming back to have one more season with the Denvers. He's going to play for the Broncos for one more season." Now, if you have somebody in your car with you, and I say that, and the other guy goes, "That's bullshit, right?" "Oh, yeah. Why would he do that? He's 90 years old. He's not coming back to the Broncos." "Oh, yeah, that's what I thought." But when you're alone in the car, you're like, is that true? I don't know. Is Elway coming back to play for the Broncos? I don't know, right? It's kind of weird.
So speaking of the quarantine, have you been broadcasting from home, or are you guys still working out of the station?
I was broadcasting from home, and then you can't see it because it's this fucking thing broke.
Uh-oh.
And so I had to go into the station, and I enjoyed it much more. It's much easier to go in and to do it there. Yeah, you run a risk of dying a horrible death with the COVID, but to be in the studio with Bellio and Mondo and the whole gang is really cool. and you guys know this. I don't know if you guys are married or not, but you know, guys aren't really built to stay home.
No.
You know, we're just built to go out and you know, hunters and gatherers. Like when you go on vacation, I imagine, you know, the first thing you do is you drop all your crap in the hotel room and then you get out of the hotel.
Exactly right.
That's what we do. That's what we do. Right?
Men need some reason to get up and leave the house, whether
That's
it's
right.
work or fishing or what have you.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, we've talked about that too. It's come up. We got about, I think, 3 or 4 shows in the can before things really shut down again. And just out of respect for Greg and I see each other all the time, we're neighbors, but you know, out of respect for our guests, okay, let's go to Zoom. And Zoom has been a boon for us because we've been able to connect with folks like you in LA, across the country, New York, all the way over in the UK. So it's been, you know, very a cool thing. It doesn't take the place of in-person conversation though. And
you're right.
We were talking about this recently, how challenging it can be to gauge when to jump in. You don't want to talk over people. It's a lot harder to gauge body language. So as you know, as challenging it can also be very rewarding because it does allow you to really talk to folks you may never ever have met before. But there's something to be said for that in-person contact, and we can't wait for that to be able to do that again real soon, hopefully.
Yeah, it's I really look. It's been a horrible year, but I think when we all get back to normal, I think every one of us will completely appreciate everything we do much more.
I hope
going
so.
to a Laker game or a Dodger game or a movie or even a dinner, you know, literally sitting in a restaurant, inside of a restaurant, you know, for the rest of our lives. We'll be like, oh shit, look, we're inside. Look, wow, there's hot food here.
Even shaking hands. Something
Right.
as simple as that, patting on the back, a hug. It's amazing what we've taken for granted.
Yeah, and I think we should go back to shaking hands once we all have the, you know, that stupid ass thing where people put their elbows up, right? Seen that? And everyone's so uncomfortable doing it, right? It's like, oh, yeah, the fist bump, and you don't know what to do. You don't know the elbow, the fist, and it's a mess. And by the way, when somebody shakes your hand, that tells you a billion things about the guy.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
whether he looks at you, if it's a firm grip, it's one of those wet, you know,
The limp fish.
Oh yeah, right. The limp, wet fist. God almighty. And nobody's told that guy, right? That that's not how you shake the hand. The guy's like 65 years old and he's still just with the dead paw.
Well, our guest today is Tim Conway Jr., KFI-AM radio host and son of Tim Conway, best known for McHale's Navy, The Carol Burnett Show, and a ton of other fantastic TV shows and movies over the years. We're really glad to have had this time to talk about Tim's career in radio. And in our next segment, stay tuned. We're going to talk to him a little bit more about his relationship with his dad and growing up a Conway. So stick with us right here on Heilman and Haver.
Well, welcome back to Heilman and Haver. Today is March 6th, and on this day in 1981, the most trusted man in America, Walter Cronkite, signed off as anchorman of CBS Evening News after 19 years with his trademark valediction, and that's the way it is.
And in 1985, Yul Brynner appeared in his 4,500th performance of Rodgers and Hammerstein masterpiece musical, The King and I. Brynner also played the title role of King Mongut of Siam opposite Deborah Kerr in the 1956 film adaptation directed by Walter Lang.
And born today in 1906, Lou Costello, who, partnered with Bud Abbott, made up the most popular comedy team of the 1940s and early 50s and were the highest paid entertainers in the world during World War II. Also born today in 1923, announcer, game show host, comedian, actor, singer, and Johnny Carson's right-hand McMahon, Ed McMahon.
And let's not forget Rob Reiner, born in 1947, son of Emmy Award-winning actor, comedian, writer, and producer Carl Reiner. Rob followed in his dad's footsteps and with the 70s hit All in the Family and timeless films like The Princess Bride and Stand By Me. And speaking of following in a father's footsteps, we're pleased to be joined by Tim Conway Jr., award-winning radio host and son of beloved comedian and actor Tim Conway of McHale's Navy and Carol Burnett Show fame. Do you get a lot of interviews where, I mean, it's just tell us about your dad. Tell us about your dad, because you've got a career too. Does that ever get old as a child?
Never,
No?
ever. No, it doesn't, because my dad always embraced everybody. That, like when we would go to a restaurant, either Baroni's or you know, San Pietro's or whatever, and literally during the Carol Burnett Show, it would be like sometimes 5 or 10 times during the meal. people would come up and talk to my dad and want to get an autograph or about, or the Carol Burnett show or whatever. I went to Disneyland because people were from out of town. There'd be like a pack of people like following him, right? And he never, ever once got pissed off or was short with anybody because he knew if it wasn't for those people, he would have nothing in life. So he always took time. Plus, my dad didn't know how to get out of a conversation with anybody. So if he went to let's say he went to to a party, and the cook was outside having a cigarette, and the cook said, "Hey, I like McHale's Navy." My dad would spend 3 hours talking to that guy, then get in his car and split because he had no idea how to get out of a conversation. So later in life, I taught him because I had learned at the racetrack. You compliment and leave. You got some funny shit there.
Yeah.
Gone. Oh, man, that coat looks great.
Yep.
Compliment, move. But no, I love talking about it. It helps me as well and people are interested. I would hate to, have somebody like, I know there are some celebrities like sons or daughters who hate talking about their parents. They hate it. As a matter of fact, there's this one girl that she now refuses to talk about her dad. And her dad's a very famous man. Refuse to talk about him because that's all anybody wanted to talk about. And
Right.
and I'm the exact opposite. I mean, if you guys want to come on and talk about an hour of just talking about McHale's Navy or Apple Dumpling Gang or, they went that way and that way, $1 billion hobo dwarf, whatever, I'm in. But I will tell you a funny story. You guys probably don't remember McHale's Navy.
Oh, I watched McHale's Navy.
Oh, you did? Okay, good.
Yeah, that was also one of my sick day things. When I'd stay home from school. McHale's Navy was 1:30 in the afternoon. Yep.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that's pretty cool, Greg. But my dad did a series of shows. They did the first season of McHale's Navy. Then they took a hiatus, and they were guaranteed to come back for another season. So my dad went home to Cleveland, and was going to spend the summer with his mom and dad, my grandparents. And my grandmother said, now that you're out of work, I set you up for an interview at Schutt's hardware store.
Yes.
And my dad's like, what? He said, yeah, but you got an interview tomorrow at 10 a.m. at Schutt's. And he goes, Mom, I'm going back to the show. She goes, no. She goes, you're not sitting around the couch all summer. You got to work. I mean, my dad was like, 29 years old, 28 years old. So my dad goes down to Schutt's to meet Mr. Schutt. He had known him since he grew up. And John Schutt is showing him through the hardware store. It's one of those old, Midwestern hardware stores. You can probably, you know what it smells like. And my dad's going around learning where the nuts are, the bolts, the toasters, the all this crap. And then he sees over the counter, there's a black and white TV screen, and over the counter they're playing McHale's Navy, and he's watching it in the hardware store while he's interviewing for the job.
He recounts a lot of those stories in his book, in What's So Funny.
That's right.
He spends a lot of time on your grandparents, Dan and Sophia, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
My daughter's named after my grandmother, but then Sophia became like a hip name. So every time I explain, and I say, yeah, it's my daughter Sophia. She's named after her grandmother, and I was in before you guys. So stop with the Sophias.
Were they as quirky as your dad made it sound?
They were pretty. Yeah, my grandfather was a very funny man. He didn't know it, but he was hysterical. I remember, and I think this is in my dad's book. But they lived in on the east side of Cleveland, a place called Sugar and Falls. And it was every, 4 or 5 years, you get a tornado warning. Everybody would, slide into the basement. And that happens, all the kids in the basement. And then you hear this like freight train come down the street, right? This tornado comes down the street, missed the house by a couple 100 feet. So my grandfather goes out and he looks out and he sees this elm tree that he used to have in his yard. And it was literally like 80 feet tall. It was probably 10,000 pounds. And, 18 feet in circumference, huge old tree, probably 75 years old. And the tree was rooted and down the street in the middle of the intersection. And my grandfather gets up, goes outside, looks at where the tree was. And now the tree is, 40 yards down the road. And he comes in the house. He goes, goddamn kids. But my grandfather, when he got married, Bill Butler was a very good friend of his, and Bill Butler was down wait a minute, did Bill Butler? Yeah, Bill Butler died, so I can tell this story. But he was down at a bar with my grandfather, his friend, and they met a woman down there. Well, my grandfather was married, so my grandfather goes home. But Bill knocks on my grandfather's door and says, hey, I met this lady. My wife will kill me. Can I come in for a while? So he says, yeah, but you got to be quiet. You got to shut the hell up because, my grandmother's sleeping upstairs. So Bill and this woman are, on the couch, tossing around. And all of a sudden, my grandfather gets a knock on his door upstairs. And he goes, what the hell are you doing? He goes, she died. He goes, what? She died. I don't know how. She just passed away. Probably too much alcohol. I'm telling you, she's dead. So my grandfather goes down, tries to get her pulse. She's dead. So instead of calling the cops, they weekend Bernie's her back to the bar and plop her head up on the bar, give Rick a 20 and say, hey, you didn't see us. Right? And nothing ever happened.
And this is the environment that your dad grew up in.
That's right.
And so things start falling into place for us.
That's right.
What's the old phrase? Explains a lot.
Yeah,
That's
right.
But I mean, can you imagine nowadays doing that? Give a guy $20. He goes, hey, she's dead. Don't say anything.
Yeah. So we, what actually got me thinking about having you on the show was I listened to actually your dad's autobiography on audiobook, and it was
cool.
really, really well done. It was, the 2 or 3 paragraphs that he reads in the beginning had me in stitches before the thing even started. And one of the things that really jumped out at me as a dad, I've got 3 daughters of my own, was throughout his career, his dedication to you guys, to his family, as a father of 6 natural kids and then his stepdaughter as well.
Right.
And he said over and over, and you've alluded kind of this before, how happy he was to always just be working. And, he didn't have that Hollywood agenda that allowed him to, stay home with you guys and spend more time on, the shenanigans, the gorilla suits and the swimming pool zip lines, et cetera.
Right.
Give us a couple more of your favorite memories of your dad around the house.
Well, my dad never really enjoyed, going to Hollywood parties. He didn't feel comfortable. He didn't grow up with those type of people. He grew up with blue collar guys who worked at factories. So no, my dad was around all the time. We went to, we loved going to Builders Emporium, the old San Fernando Valley. And it was a different time. It was back when my dad would throw, 6 kids and we all had a friend, or 3 or 4 of us had a friend. So it'd be like 12 kids. And we'd go up to Big Bear for just for the day to play in the snow. And my dad was always the first guy to to jump in the car and go with us and play football out in front or throw the ball around. And you can tell when, and I'm sure Matt and Greg, you guys have friends. You can tell when a kid's like 10 or 11 years old. You can tell if that dad threw the ball around with him, right? Because if not, it looks like he's throwing with his opposite hand.
Right.
But I remember my dad, I was young. I was probably on 6th grade or so. And I pitched a no-hitter. I was a pitcher in Little League. I pitched a no-hitter, 6 innings, no runs, no hits, no walks, nothing. It was great. It was one of the highlights of my life. And I remember going home. My dad was working at the time. And he got home. I'm still in my Boston Red Sox, uniform. And I said, Dad, I threw a no-hitter. He goes, oh, great, man. That's great. Fantastic. I said, I think I got something here. I'd like to pursue baseball. And he goes, sit down. He goes, you're not that good. He goes, you're pitching to guys who will never make even their high school team, let alone pros or college or pros. So I'm going to save you a life of anguish and craziness. You're not that good. I'm like, okay, all right. And I thought he probably did save me, right? Yeah, a ton of time. But we had a zip line across the pool in the San Fernando Valley. And my dad had, 6 kids and a wife, and we had, some help around the house. So my dad didn't have a tremendous amount of money, compared to some other celebrities. He bought a house in the San Fernando Valley in 1971, and he paid $110,000 for it. And he had no idea how he's going to, pay for it. But it was like, 4,000 square feet, but $110,000. So in the pool area, and I think, obviously he put it up so we could have fun, but he put a zip line across the pool, and you get on one end and it would go down, and it was connected to a phone pole on the other end. And as you got the deep end or the shallow end, you dropped into the pool. Well, my brother Sean got too scared to drop and stayed on it the whole time and smashed right into the pole off to the emergency room.
Oh.
My dad had like a house account at the local emergency room.
A frequent flyer miles.
That's right. Yeah.
Punch card.
Yeah. This broken leg is on us. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. It was just and my mom was a little crazy, and my dad sort of saved us from, that craziness, trying to take the blame for everything. I remember throwing a pillow across the room, and it broke my mom's favorite, like, hurricane lamp. I didn't even know what a hurricane lamp was. And it shattered into a million pieces. My mom comes down the stairs, who the, getting all crazy. And my dad took the blame for it. He's like, sorry, man. I tossed a pillow at Tim and hit the lamp, and I'll clean it up. But he did a lot of saving us from, a woman who had 6 kids, 5 boys, before antidepressants existed.
Yeah, certain death.
That's right. Right. Imagine that she had 6 kids in 8 years.
Wow. Well, Tim, your dad described himself as a shy man, but he had obviously had some famous and influential and outgoing friends in show business. In previous interviews, you shared that the people he liked to bring to the house were kind of the behind the scenes guys, the writers, producers, lighting guys, kind of the working stiffs. Do you think that was that he was more comfortable around them because of the Midwestern upbringing? Do you think it was just that was, the kind of guy he was, that he was just kind of everybody's pal, that kind of thing?
Well, I think that those guys are honest. The lighting guy, the associate producer, the writers, they really didn't have any reason to hold back. Celebrities, they're not honest with you for the most part. They're not going to tell you the bad parts of their life or the crazy kids in their life or whatever, because they want to protect their image. And it's all like it's a lot of phony, guys walking around, guys and gals, and they're not ultimately that interesting. They're reading lines that were written for them, and the guys that wrote the lines, they're interesting. Mm-hmm. But the actors and actresses, for the most part, they don't seem there's something missing there. It doesn't seem like a whole person. And they love acting, and so they love acting like somebody else. And it's a weird, I can't put my finger on it, but it's something that, when you see these actors on Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel, and, they never say anything like, you're like, wow, really, that happened to you? I mean, it's all just, like canned crap. It wasn't that interesting. But my dad found, the people he grew up with interesting, and those were the guys behind the scenes, the lighting guy and the associate director and the guy down the street and the guy who owned the cleaners and that kind of crap.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that, because I remember an interview Johnny Carson had with Gore Vidal, and they were lamenting the fact that they don't have conversations anymore. That because you notice when an actor goes on Fallon or Kimmel, it's all scripted. Right. It's like you got the host is the setup guy. So do you have anything interesting to tell us about your trip to the Bahamas? And there's a story behind it.
Sure.
There's something pre-planned. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
But not only is it pre-planned on Letterman, everything was written. And so if you went off script to tell a story, he got pissed and he wouldn't talk to you during the commercial break.
Really?
No kidding.
Yeah. Kind of a strange bird.
Well, it's like Dick Cavett said. I think it was Steve Allen, Jack Parr, one of the two, that told him, have a conversation with people. And Cavett was, I think, one of the best at that. Just simply sitting and having a conversation with the likes of Orson Welles, Betty Davis, these people who, again, probably were a little bit more apt to tell the real story maybe than modern day celebrities. But
sure,
that's something that we strive to do too here on the show, is that it's a lot of fun to talk to the folks behind the scenes, the composers, the screenwriters. Last week we talked to Danny Bilson, who wrote The Rocketeer, working with Spike Lee. He's the guy behind the scenes doing the writing, and he's an interesting dude.
Right. Look, one of my favorite guests, well, the favorite guests we ever had on were the people that walked off the show, right, because they got upset. Those were the ultimate greatest guests ever. But secondly, one of the great guests we had on was a guy from Northern California who knew everything in the world about trees, right? He knew what type they were, where they grow, how to fix them if they're sick, if they got disease, whatever. And that guy was infinitely more interesting than 99% of the people in show business. Right. But I like those kind of guys. When you're traveling around and you're listening to weekend radio shows and a guy comes on and he's a chef, right? I love that kind of crap. Or another guy's an expert in boats or trees or cars or whatever.
Yeah,
specialists. I like guys, specialists, with a lot of knowledge and just you can tell they're having fun on the radio talking about it, and their passion comes over the radio as well.
Well, speaking of passion and speaking of hobbies, no interview with a Conway would be complete without talking about horse racing.
Ding dong with you.
That's right.
Let's
go. Your dad was an avid fan, owned horses, a lot of funny stories in his books about some of the challenges they had with some of the animals that they owned with his second wife, Char, and, even with friends like Harvey Korman. He also founded the Don Macbeth Memorial Jockeys Fund, which did an immense amount of amazing work for out-of-work jockeys. And in fact, June 2nd, I believe, of 2019 was declared Tim Conway Day at Santa Anita, right?
I think you're right. Yes. Yeah. And my dad enjoyed the racetrack. My grandfather came to America after living in 10 different orphanages until he was 18 years old. Finally got on a ship, came across America, and his first job was at Thistledown, which is the racetrack in Cleveland. And so my dad grew up around horse races and horse tracks, and those are the greatest people in the world. There's not a single person that goes to the racetrack that doesn't have a million stories and a great sense of humor, because they're gambling, right? They're gambling. Like if you go to Santa Anita, which is the big racetrack here in Southern California, there's probably about 400 handicap parking spots in the parking lot, and they're always full. There's not 400 handicapped people in there. Those guys are gamblers.
Right.
And they're gambling that they're not going to get a ticket while they're in the track.
Right.
They like the action.
So you grew up around Santa Anita, Hollywood Park, Del Marone. Starting at a really young age, right? You've got your stories in your dad's book about taking you out to the track at in third grade for a math lesson. Tell us what happened out there.
It was I was in Miss Bernstein's class in elementary school at the Valley, and wasn't doing well in math. So my dad on a Wednesday takes me out of school, takes me to the racetrack, and everything about the racetrack is math. What the jockey weighs to the times, the quarter pole, how much money is being bet on win, show, and place, the gimmicks, which are the trifectas, superfectas. Everything is math. Everything at the racetrack, and it was great. By the end of the day, I understood that that math is important if you want to go to the racetrack. And in life, and there's a lot of, and I really became interested. And while I didn't learn everything that day at the racetrack about math, I learned that I loved math, and then and numbers were a big deal. And the only thing that really came sort of easy for me. So I get back to Miss Bernstein's class the next day, and she says, okay, the 3 speeches were given today. Carrie, Wendy, and Tim. I'm like, oh shit, I got nothing, because I'm one of those guys that doesn't plan anything, right? If I have to give a speech in third grade, you get 5 months notice, and the night before I start writing it. So I had nothing. I look at my backpack and I see that there's a program that I had from the previous day at Santa Anita. So I pick the program out and I show these kids how to box an exacta, right? I say, if you like the 3 and the 5 in this race, you want to go 3-5, 5-3. So if the 5 comes in first or second, you win. And if the 3 comes in first or second, in that order, you win. And if you don't have it boxed, if the 5 wins and you have the 3 up front, you lose. Off to the principal's office. And the principal called my dad and said, this is borderline child abuse to teach your third grader how to box an exacta at the racetrack. And my dad says, let me tell you what child abuse is. He has it 5-3. It comes in 3-5 and he doesn't have it boxed. That's child abuse. That's child abuse. It was a lot of fun out there. It really is. Some of my favorite memories are sitting there with my dad at the track. I remember going out with my dad, and my stepmother was not feeling well at the time. She wasn't gravely ill. She was just sick. And I pick up my dad at his house. We go to the racetrack. We spend 6 hours there. We go eat. I drive him home. I spend 10 hours with him. And I get home, and my wife says, how's your stepmother doing? I said, I don't know. And he goes, well, he didn't say anything about it? He didn't, and I didn't ask. Right? We were at the racetrack.
We had other priorities.
We just talked about the races. That's what you do at the racetrack. We're too much time. We spend too much time handicapping the race to talk about other stuff, right? And it's an escape. You want to get out there to not, talk about crap like that.
We'll have to get you up here to Emerald Downs. We got a beautiful track.
I love Emerald Downs.
Yeah.
My dad was stationed in the Army up in Seattle and would love going to Emerald Downs. What's the big fort up there? Fort Lewis.
Fort Lewis,
right? Yeah, Fort Lewis.
Yeah, that was an interesting part of his book. I enjoyed that. He goes, that's just a little south of us, south of Tacoma. And he also spoke about, I think, doing some walk-on parts in Seattle theater. I mean, that was kind of his first foray.
Oh, yeah. And he loved Seattle. And, obviously he lived up there for a while. And when he was in the Army, he was in charge of, typing up, an unbelievable typist. I mean, he literally could type like 1,000 words a minute. So he would be in charge of sending people around the country, and he would type up their orders. So he'd literally type up his own orders. Like, hey, we're sending Thomas Daniel Conway to Cleveland for 2 weeks, right? He'd hand the order and boom, he's off to Cleveland for 2 weeks. But he absolutely loved Seattle. And he always bragged that, for the 2 years he was up at Fort Lewis, they were not attacked once. Not one enemy.
That's right.
When a foreign enemy ever attacked that fort when he was there. He was very proud of that, by the way.
And along with the typist, he was also quite a seamstress. It wouldn't be a seamstress. It'd be a seamster. He made his own clothes. I mean, he made his own. I remember him making his own sports coat. And when I was living with him, one of my chores was to take all his stuff to the cleaners and pick them up. And so I take all that stuff down to the cleaners, and all the clothes came back, and they always smell like cigarettes. My dad didn't smoke, but the guy who owned the cleaners did, right? So that was always interesting. And so I'd bring the clothes back, and one day, all of his pants, all of his slacks, all of his shirts were all in the plastic bags, but one of his sports coats was not. And I said to the guy, I said, did you guys forget this? He says, no. He says, it's so poorly made, it doesn't fit on our machines. He goes, this has to be a gimmick jacket that your dad got from the Carol Burnett show because I can't even fit it on the machine. It is so poorly made. So he made all his clothes, and Harvey Korman took all of his clothes off the rack from the Carol Burnett show.
That's right. Yeah, he stole everything.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. That's 100% correct.
By the way, seamster is the word.
Seamster? It is seamster. So I was right.
We talked about the instant thing. I just went out to Google and did it. Kind of like Teamster. Kind of like Teamster.
Seamster.
Right. And Taylor is gender neutral. By the way of
Taylor.
So there you go.
Oh, good.
I learn something new every day on this show.
I never knew that. I never knew he's a seamster.
Well, speaking of Carol Burnett and some of the people on that show. So before you made the move to radio, you took part in a lot of your dad's productions, Dorf videos, Dorf on Golf, one of my favorites.
Yes.
Did voices on Johnny Carson, episodes of Mama's Family, the spinoff that Vicki Lawrence did from the Carol Burnett show. Your dad is still a dad, but as an entertainer yourself, it must have been fascinating to spend time with some of these talented folks. Kind of in the periphery of his world. Are there any memories that stand out to you of some of these famous colleagues that your dad had?
Yeah, I think the people that came over to the house, like Carol Burnett would come over for Christmas, Harvey Korman, Don Knotts occasionally, and it was always super surreal and odd that you're having Christmas dinner and you look to your left and Don Knotts is sitting there. Right. I mean, it was just such an unbelievable moment. But that Carol Burnett show had a tremendous effect on a lot of people. And I remember being at work and over at KFI, and one of our sister stations is KLAC, and they run a charity every year for disabled veterans. And James Worthy, the great basketball player for the LA Lakers, was coming in to answer phones and for the charity event and be interviewed on the radio. And I never really get starstruck, but I wanted to meet James Worthy and tell him what a huge part he had in my childhood. And so I was talking to him, and he asked what I did, and I said, do a show on KFI. And then he says, what's your name? I said, Conway. He says, are you any relation to Tim Conway? And I said, yeah, that's my dad. And he shakes my hand, and he says, let me tell you something, young man. I said, young man, I'm probably older than he is. He says, James Worthy said, I won championships in high school. I won championships in college. I won championships in the NBA. I have more money than I can ever spend. And he said, I would give all of it away, including my house, my cars, everything I own, my trophies. I'd give all of it away to have one more hour in North Carolina on the couch on a Saturday with the windows open and sitting next to my grandmother and watching the Carol Burnett show. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
That's powerful.
That's awesome.
Huge, unbelievable effect. Yeah, but it was fun. I mean, it was fun to have, Mannix was at my wedding with Carol Burnett. That was kind of cool. But again, my dad didn't have a tremendous amount of contact. Didn't like to go to parties. He wasn't comfortable. And didn't really have a lot of celebrities over at the house. One of the ones that you guys may know the voice, may not know his name, but it's Ernie Anderson.
Yeah. And
Ernie Anderson was the voice of, the Love Boat. He's the great voice of ABC growing up. Then Thursdays, that unbelievable voice. He did all the ABC shows. Have you driven a Ford? And Parquet was another one. He did all these voiceovers. Well, my dad and him met in Cleveland in the 50s, and they came out to Hollywood together to try to make it. And so Ernie Anderson was a big, huge part of my childhood. And at one point, Ernie was smoking cigarettes, and his wife, Edwina, said, "If you keep smoking, I'm leaving you." And he goes, "Oh, fuck it, man." So she comes up. He was at her office, and she drives up, and he's smoking a cigarette. And I was 14 at the time. So she drives up, and he sees her, and he hands me the cigarette, and he goes, "That's yours." I said, "All right." So Edwina comes in. I take a hit of the cigarette to try to sell it. And she goes, "You smoke?" I said, "Yeah, I do." So she goes into her office, and he grabs the cigarette, and he goes, "I told you not to put your fucking lips on it, man."
Like the voice of God.
Like to avoid, her finding out that he was indeed smoking, he still didn't want to relinquish just the one cigarette.
One hit.
I told you not to put your fucking lips on that, man. Right.
How about Harvey? Did you get to spend much time with her? I'm a huge Harvey Korman fan.
I did. Harvey Korman was truly one of the greatest characters of all time. I remember when my dad and Harvey were doing a show up in Lake Tahoe. So they're going to fly from LAX to Reno and then take a car up to Lake Tahoe. And I had nothing to do that weekend. I wasn't working. So I said, "Hey, can I go?" And they said, "Yeah, sure. Jump on the plane." So we're going to take American Airlines up to Reno, and Reno drive up to Tahoe. So we get on the plane, and Harvey's in front of me. And he said to the two stewardesses, he goes, "Good afternoon, ladies." And they said, "Mr. Korman, very nice to meet you." That's great. And they looks in the cockpit, and there's no pilots in the cockpit. And he says to the flight attendants, he goes, "Hey, where are the pilots?" And the two stewardesses said, "We're the pilots." And he looks and he goes, "Wait a minute, you guys are the pilots?" He goes, they said, "Yep." And he says, "I'll catch you on the next flight." And he turns around, he walks off the plane. And he got on the next flight. He met us up there like an hour and a half later. And I said, "Harvey, what was that all about?" And he goes, if this plane goes down, I want a guy in that cockpit pushing every button and pulling every lever. I don't want a woman in the microphone going, "Tell my sweetheart I loved him."
That's funny. One of my favorite bits that they did when they were touring together, it was a charity event. I think you can see the clip on YouTube where they play the very harried traveler, and your dad plays the very slow, much in the vein of the world's oldest man, the world's oldest flight booker,
right.
airline guy.
Yeah.
And it was, I'm in stitches every time, and they must have been in their, I'm assume 80s. At that point, or it's late 70s. Was Harvey significantly older than your dad? He was a few years older, right?
He was a few years older, but he was still, sharp all the way up until the end.
Yeah.
I remember, when a friend of mine had a grandfather who wanted to go see the show in Palm Springs, and so we gave him tickets, and he went every year. My friend's grandfather went every year in Palm Springs, 5 years in a row. Went to see my dad and Harvey and Louise Duarte and watched the entire show. And so Jason Sulaco's grandfather goes backstage, and I happen to be there that weekend, and says to my dad and Harvey, he goes, "I've seen the show 5 years in a row," and he goes, "I got to thank you guys for making it fresh and changing the entire show every year so I can come back and enjoy it." What he didn't know is that show was word for word the same every year. But he was 92, so he forgot last year's show. It's like when my dad wrote his book. They were very successful. They had a very nice run, and they actually had a second and a third printing of the book, which was very fortunate. And then the publisher asked my dad to write a second book. So he writes the first 25 pages of it and gives it to my stepmother, because she was always the one to be very honest with him, whether it was good or bad. And she reads it, and she says, it's great. It's sensational. However, it's all in your first book. And my dad said, yeah, that's the idea. Just put out the same book, because the people reading them will forget that they read it.
Well, and that's kind of like what he said in his intro to his own book, which he didn't narrate, but he intros it and says, I people keep asking me to narrate my own book, but I've read it. I don't need to read it again. There's nothing new in there. And I was driving home from the library, just losing it. Right. But that's one that needs to go on the shelf permanently. It's a phenomenal read.
That's great.
Young and old. I did a review on the book a couple days ago on our Facebook page, and said, get YouTube ready. When you're either listening to this or reading it, have it ready. I bought a copy for my mom. She's loving it. But it just inspires you to go and watch those old clips.
Oh, that's great, man.
So
that's really cool.
We wanted to get back to fatherhood real quick here before you wrap up. And he, like you said, your dad was not necessarily a party animal by any stretch of the imagination. But every room he walked into, he admits that he looked immediately for something, a way to make people laugh. That was just in his DNA. Right. And so I assume humor had to have been part of his parenting style. And you guys were obviously close. What parenting skills did you take from him that you now use?
Well, I think first of all, never hitting my kid, not even think about it, but also very rarely raising my voice. I never heard my dad swear, and I never heard him yell at any of us. He would just do it with pretty quiet, pretty firm about things, but very quiet. Or with humor. Like, here's an example. My curfew in high school was midnight. I'd be home by midnight. I was pretty good in high school. So I was out all night one night, probably, not scoring on chicks and drinking beer, which is typical. And I get home one morning around 8 o'clock in the morning and turn the alarm on, get in bed, and I'm out. And my dad wakes me up around 11 o'clock. He said, what time did you get home last night? And I said, I got home around 11:58, I think. And he walks out and he says, are you sure you got home around 11:58? I said, yeah. And he said, well, the LA Times gets delivered at 5:30 in the morning. And he walks out. I'm like, wait a minute. What does the LA Times have to do with me? He goes, your car's parked on it.
Oh, busted.
All right. I get it. I understand it. And, so he would do it. That's the way he told me, you're not going to be home at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning anymore. And I didn't, he didn't have to yell. He just had to know that he knew that I was lying to him, and I felt horrible. But it's also, another story that I had. Another one, he used to come to my room and he'd say, geez, I got to really thank you. Because all the other kids in the house, I'm having to replace their carpet like every 4 or 5 years. But in your room, I'll never have to replace the carpet. And then he starts walking out. I said, what do you mean? He goes, I can walk on your pants, then your shirt, then a box, then a tray, then a plate, another box, another shirt, a pair of pants, and I leave. Never have to use the carpet in your house, in your room. I'll never have to change it. And that's, again, his way of saying, clean up the room. Right, without saying it.
And was it possible to keep a straight face when you're being chastised by a man like him?
It was pretty fun. We had a great time because I when my parents got divorced, I was 14 going on 15. And my brothers were all younger and my sister was older, and they all decided to stay with my mom, but I moved out with my dad, which my mom hated, right? Because I'm splitting with my dad. And it was great. It was just like the two of us for about 3 years until he got into another relationship and got married. And it was fantastic. It was just him and I in this, house in Encino. So that was kind of a cool time.
Well, it's always, It's so pleasant when you meet people that you admire, like yourself, and you hear about people that you admire, and you hear that they are the way that you hope they would be.
Well, yeah, you know what? I agree. I agree with you. Not so much me, but when you do meet somebody, like when we've had some guests on our show, some pretty big guests, like Mayor Garcetti was one of them, and Larry King was another. But they would come in to be interviewed on the air. Mayor Garcetti is the mayor of Los Angeles, and Larry King, the talk show host from CNN, and who just passed away recently. And they both came in without any entourage. They just walked in by themselves. We buzzed them in. They came in, did the interview, and split. I'm just like regular, normal people. And I grew up in the same area as Mayor Garcetti around the same time, and we didn't even talk politics. We just talked about did you go to Perry's Pizza? Oh, wasn't that a cool place? Yeah, it was right down the street from on Zelza where that McDonald's was. Oh yeah, right, the ice cream place there. I mean, it's just sort of getting to know the actual human side of people is kind of cool.
For those who can't tell, we're talking to Tim Conway Jr. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today. We're having a great time.
Well, guys, I appreciate coming on, and I wish you a tremendous amount of luck with this and success. And when you guys do put it up on the internet, let me know, and we'll promote it on KFI.
Yeah, this has been a real pleasure, Tim. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Dig dong with you, too. I appreciate it. Matt, nice to meet you. Greg, nice to meet you.
Well, thank you again to our guest, Tim Conway Jr. You can tune into Tim's show on iHeartRadio and on the KFI website at KFI-AM640.iheart.com. And get in on the fun. Follow Tim on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and they're all linked in the show notes.
And tune in next week, where we'll be joined by Tracy Gossel, founder of the nonprofit Film Preservation Society, which has recovered and restored several silent films formerly thought to be lost or unavailable for viewing, including 3 starring Douglas Fairbanks, the topic of Tracy's 2015 biography, The First King of Hollywood.
And don't forget, Heilman and Haver can now be heard every week. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Audible, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. If you enjoy the show, make sure to follow us and share the podcast with a friend or two, and we'd love to hear from you, so please join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, and email us with thoughts and comments at heilmanandhaver@gmail.com. And until the footlights come up again, thanks for supporting local theater and for joining us right here on Heilman and Haver.